Tonight we going hard, lights, magic sparks. And you might come past across the six score chick flinging all five spots with a shout. You thought that's Candace Paul. She may be a lady, KB. Past the crystal cool as the AC, the ice princess. No ready to fit this. She got it like a dime in the spot. She take risks. WNBA sparking, loving the best 'cause they all so hard. Tonight we going hard.
Well, good evening, WNBA and LA Sparks fans, and welcome into the LA Sparks 365 Network, your 24/7 365 comprehensive home of the WNBA and your two-time WNBA champion Los Angeles Sparks. After an off night last night, gave me a chance to sort of recoup the voice. Again, still got the cough a bit, but it's improving, I should say. Welcome back here, folks, to LAS 365 on this Thursday night edition of WNBA 365. Of course, like always, joining the Hang Up by Chris Amanci, our go-to swingman host from the Internet Studios up in Anaheim, California. Cal McClure joining you here from Studio 171 in San Diego. Chris, good evening, man. A lot going on today. Some positive LA news talk about Chris at the top of the show. Other than that, man, how's it going?
Nothing much. Just coming here and let's say I'm staying here forever, just throwing that out there.
Yeah, no need to. I mean, we knew that was going to be happening anyway, regardless of whatever your situation may have been. With that, folks, well, the time's come now for you folks out there to start voting to send your favorite players to the 2015 WNBA All-Star Game next month at the Mohegan Sun Arena in Utica, Connecticut, folks. There are 4 ways for you to vote for your favorite All-Stars by doing so on WNBA.com, the WNBA Center Court app, on Twitter, and also on Facebook. Now, the rules of this thing go as follows. Here to vote on WNBA.com, you must use the player index, the player index or player pages. All votes will be accepted under the following rules and regulations. Of course, you must, pick 10 players, 1 vote of 10 players per day per 24 hours on WNBA.com. On the app, same way goes as follows here. You pick 1 player or 10 players per 24 hours on each device. On Twitter, by typing the first and last name or the Twitter handle of your favorite player with the hashtag WNBA ballot. You can do so as well on Facebook. Same way, same rules apply. And, of course, the All-Star Game is on July 25th at 3:30 p.m., live and in full on ABC at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Well, Chris, I know that we missed out on, well, that you missed it on Tuesday night. And, of course, Chris, it was me here holding on the fort. And, of course, Tuesday night again, Chris, sort of almost a replay of Sunday, almost, man. The Sparks, again, come out strong in the first half. But, of course, Chris, the castle burns down. The wheels fall off, the bandwagon on Tuesday night. They fall to the Lynx at home, 67-52. Now, Chris, obviously the first half, again, man, it vaguely reminded me a lot of Sunday against the Storm, Chris. Again, it was the Sparks playing good. But, Chris, as Coach Dave Miller said, though, at halftime, can they keep it going for the next 20 minutes, Chris? And it did not look good after the third quarter, Chris, where the Sparks only put up 9 points in the second half. Chris, in your mind, through the 3 games, okay, I know it's been rough. No Nneka Ogwumike, no Elena Beard, of course, no KT, Debovic, or Parker, Chris. What was the story in your mind on Tuesday as you saw, yeah, Chris, the Sparks having a lead, but again, any confidence, though, going forward that the Sparks were going to hang on and win that game at all on Tuesday? What was your thoughts, though, when you saw the team again, as we saw, Chris, time and time again, opening night in Seattle, then, of course, on Sunday again, leading or down by a few at the half, but again, the third quarter, it's game over. What do you think?
I think probably since they don't have shit that they have, like either Nneka, Candace Parker, or Chrissy Tolliver, and since they don't have it and they don't have a go-to player to close out the game.
Chris, in my thoughts, I mean, I know that you probably watched me on Tuesday hold the fort down here, man, was, the injury bug, Chris. I mean, okay, we know that you can't dictate injuries. They're going to happen to any player on every team, any point in time, Chris. I mean, you can't, judge that, okay? They're going to happen, and they need the time to, of course, rehab and get that injury back up. But, Chris, I think, though, man, that as you said, I think it's just a matter of the Sparks not being sure of how to close out a game. And, Chris, like I said, though, too, when I talked to Candace Parker back in September about, asking her about, what went wrong for you guys in 2012, in 2013, losing those games in the playoffs by 1 point in Game 3, was that you have to be better at closing down on defense, and also if you have a lead, Chris, to not give it away. I mean, the Sparks have done that and did that. On Sunday, of course, when we were there, up 10, and of course they give the lead away, again with bad third quarters. But Chris, I think though, man, that I think the injury bug has been the thing, and of course, again, like I said, Chris, we're not making excuses here, Chris. It's a bit of bad luck, that there is no of those 4 players not being here. But I think, though, Chris, that even though they're not here, you still have to find a player, Lav, Phillips, someone out there has got to take charge of this team, and right now it's not happened so far, Chris, and obviously it's been pretty rough, man. But I guess through the 3 games, Chris, if you had to give the Sparks a letter grade through 3 games so far, in spite of injuries and overseas play, Chris, what would you give them a grade-wise in regards to how they played so far and why through 3 games?
I think probably a C. Since they're led at halftime and just don't have a player to close out the game.
Chris, I'd probably say a C as well if I have to give them a grade. Maybe, Chris, maybe a C minus, because I think that it's that, squandering the leads at halftime, against the Lynx and Storm are just unacceptable, Chris. That you should be able to hold that lead, whether it's 5 or 10 points, Chris, and to see them, basically implode in front of our own eyes on Sunday was very tough to watch. And again, Chris, not like I've seen it before, Chris, for the first time. I saw them do it twice last year against the Liberty and Mercury. They blew first half leads and couldn't get the job done. So I think that's the case. Now, folks, some positive news. Say a prayer, sign of the cross, do something, folks. Good news reported by our Dynamite off the bench host, Shorty Mamba 24, a couple days ago. Kristi Tolliver due back to the Sparks sometime next week on that 3-game road trip between going to Washington, Connecticut, and New York next week. And of course, Chris, we have been waiting patiently, Chris, and of course with the overseas commitments with Eurobasket coming up to a close, Chris, and to finally have one of the puzzle pieces back in, Chris. This is probably, Chris, the best news we've heard since the first game of the year, Chris, because I know that we have missed that the team has missed Tolliver, and of course, Chris, now that she's coming back, boy, oh boy, if you get Tolliver and Phillips going in those 3 games, Chris, over there on the East Coast, it's going to help out drastically from beyond the arc, Chris. What is KT bringing to this team that right now, Chris, they've lacked a lot of star power, lacked a lot of things, Chris. So what is LA getting when Tolliver does come back from France and from Eurobasket in a couple of days? All right, so apparently Chris had a bit of a freeze up there. We'll let his internet reset itself. But again, folks, no specific date set yet, but according to our Dynamite 365 correspondent, Shorty Mama 24 on Twitter, she reported to us a couple days ago that KT, Chris Tolliver, is due back to the Sparks in a couple of days. Probably, I'd say, on the road trip again. And the road trip again for the Sparks will be starting up on Tuesday, the 23rd, when they go on to take on Washington, Connecticut, and New York on that 3-game East Coast road trip. And Chris, I think you're back finally after that freeze up. Chris, what is LA getting back? Not getting, but getting back from France when KT comes back to play with them sometime next week over there on the East Coast?
Just going to be great to have Wnba back in the lineup.
Chris, we're still a bit iffy on Nneka, but with Kristi Tolliver, Chris, coming back, that I think solidifies LA's 3-point shooting, Chris, because now we've got Aaron Phillips, of course, Chris, but now you get KT back, Chris, who has been nothing but money in her career from beyond the arc, Chris. I mean, and as we know, man, that the Sparks lacked a lot of that last season, of course, when they had Candace Wiggins and they brought in all these other 3-point shooters, Chris, and it just, it didn't click from beyond the arc, Chris. Now you have Aaron Phillips, Chris, who's a sharpshooter from beyond the arc. Now you get KT back, big boost. And again, folks, no specific date set yet. But again, Kristi Tolliver due back next week when the Sparks are again on that 3-game road trip across the East Coast. Again, the Sparks' upcoming schedule: Sun on Sunday. Yeah, there you go. The Sun on Sunday, but 21st at Staples at 2:00. Road trip will be through Washington, Connecticut, and we'll wrap up in New York on June 26th. That game will be at 12 o'clock. June 20th, I should say, 12 o'clock on TWCSN. All right, Chris, across the WNBA, man, some pretty big surprises. We look at the standings so far through 4 games of the season, where, Chris, it's been a turnaround for a lot of teams, man, that we were hoping and praying would have a bounce-back season. Chris, the Connecticut Sun, after starting off 0-1, have rattled off 4 in a row. They are on top of the Eastern Conference at 4-1, followed by Washington at 3-1, New York 3-2, Chicago 2-2, and Indiana and Atlanta at 2-4. And Chris, as we look at the Eastern Conference, man, it's basically a role reversal. You know, it's not Atlanta. It's not Indy, Chris. It's the teams, man, that we had talked about, over-publicized on here so much during the offseason. The Connecticut's, the New Yorks, the Washingtons, man, that are, getting up there and, proving, Chris, that right now they're a lot better than everyone else so far on the, that they're a lot better, Chris. Okay, let me just ask you, Chris. Out of the top 4 teams right now, the Sun being 1, Washington at 2, New York at 3, and Chicago at 4, Chris, who has been the biggest surprise in your mind in the East, and why is that?
I think I'll say the New York Liberty with Wnba not pushing all of his veterans and letting some rookies and to get some minutes and to get some points.
Well, Chris, I'm glad you're staying by your theory of the preseason where you picked the Liberty to win the Eastern Conference title, so I'm glad you're doing that right now, and I think a lot of people at home would appreciate that as well. Chris, I would say New York, but Chris, Connecticut cannot be touched. I mean, they have gone from 0-1, Chris, to rattling off 4 in a row, and they're in the catbird seat on top of the East right now by a half game over Washington, Chris, who's also played dynamite basketball. And, Chris, also, I should mention, those are the same 3 teams the Sparks play in a 4-day span when they play the Sun on Sunday, then on the road at Washington, at Connecticut, and then at New York. So, obviously, Chris, tough there. Now, I guess, Chris, is it a bit alarming, though, as well, man, that we're seeing the Fever and Dream both at 2-4, and they're being outplayed by, very young teams right now, Chris? So, out of the Fever and Dream, who's the bigger disappointment in your mind and why?
In the West?
In the East, who's the bigger disappointment so far, the Fever or Dream, and why? Because they're both at the bottom half of the conference right now.
I think Atlanta Dream. A great team with Johnny Schimmel and Mike Cooper as the head coach. Just very surprising. The bottom feeder.
Chris, I would agree with Atlanta, man, because they've been the cream of the crop in the team that's represented the Eastern Conference. I want to say about four of the last 5 finals they've been to. So to see them at the bottom half, man, is very alarming. Chris, I'm not so much alarmed about the Fever because, Chris, this is a huge transition year going from Lynn Dunn to Stephanie White, and obviously things haven't clicked just yet. But, Chris, the Fever, though, the Dream in my mind, Chris, are the bigger story in the East because, here they've been at the threshold. They've been the Eastern Conference, top dog, I want to say, since at least 2011 or 2010 when they've been to the finals, 2010, 2011, bumped down in 2012, 13, and 14. So 4 of the 5 years that they've been the number 1 seed and things have not gone well. And of course, folks, out west, a tie between Minnesota and Tulsa at 4-1, Phoenix at 2-2, Seattle 2-3, and then LA and San Antonio both at the bottom half of the conference at 0-3 for LA and 0-4 for San Antonio. So, Chris, out of the top 4 teams between the Lynx, Shock, Mercury, and Storm, who's the bigger surprise out west and why?
At 4-1 in the West, in first place. Just very surprising to see the total Shock on top of the West.
Well, Chris, not in sole possession, but tied for first place, so it's a valid point there. Chris, I would agree about the Shock being up there. I think we kind of expected them, Chris, you kind of knew it was coming, though, if the Shock were on the upside. Chris, I know they had, a few very painful, tough years when they first got there. Of course, Chris, they went 3-31 their first year in Tulsa in 2010. So you've been kind of hoping that this team kind of got back to those old Detroit Shock days, Chris. And I think about that when the Shock, though, of course, they get Diggins and they get Sims last year. Then, of course, this year, Amanda Wnba out of Minnesota, Chris. Then, to go along with the piece in place, Chris. And I think, but also, Chris, bringing in some vets, though. They've been very, very, young, but now they brought in Plannette Pierce. They brought in some other pieces, Chris, and to see them back where they kind of belong almost. It's good to see it, of course, Chris. I guess, Chris, out of the two winless teams in the West between LA and San Antonio, who gets the shame of being the biggest disappointment out West? Is it the Sparks or is it the Stars, and why?
I want to say, since what happened Tuesday and everything, I'm going to say, so I won't be a homer, I'm going to say my Sparks at 0-3 because it's LA and they're pretty much on top of the West. And at 0-3, just missing the big pieces, Parker, Wnba, Chrissy Tolliver, and now AB.
Chris, I think that, LA is probably worth being a disappointment. But, Chris, frankly, my disappointment right now in the West is not even the bottom half, Chris. The Mercury, in my eyes, are a bit of a disappointment, Chris. But at the same time, man, two words: championship hangover. And, of course, Chris, there is no Diana Taurasi. There is no Penny Turner. And, of course, Chris, no Brittany Griner still for the next 3 games. Of course, they've already played 4. She's got to step 3 more games. So, Chris, the Mercury are a very small disappointment, Chris. I would agree, though, that the Sparks are by far the biggest disappointment, Chris. In regards, though, again, for the reason we've listed, Chris, again, of, not making excuses again for the 4 players being out, but, Chris, no real talent on the outside of the 4 players being out. Of course, Chris, Aaron Phillips has played great so far. Of course, Chantal Lavender, who may be the only Sparks representative of the All-Star game this year, I think, in Connecticut, Chris. So, outside of those 2, man, it's been kind of tough so far for LA. But, of course, Chris, the Stars, though, much like the Fever, Chris, huge transition here, Chris. No Becky Hammond, and, this season, of course, and a very young team, Chris, and they are very, very exposed so far. So, again, I would say that the Sparks and Mercury are so far the disappointment so far out in the Western Conference. The schedule, again, it was a off night for the league last night and tonight. The games for tomorrow, as we're trying to pull up our schedule here. Again, the Sparks will be off again until Sunday when they take on the Connecticut Sun at 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. The games tomorrow for you folks will go as follows. Tomorrow, as I can pull it up here, just went away from me here on WNBA.com. The schedules for tomorrow, if it wants to load. All right, here we go. Set up for tomorrow here, folks. You have Tulsa taking on Washington at 4 o'clock, Indiana at New York 4:30, Chicago at Atlanta 4:30, Lynx at Stars at 5 o'clock, and then the late night game Sun at the Mercury at 7 p.m. We'll be off on Saturday due to a football game I have to work up in Anaheim on Saturday. Mystics at Fever at 4, and Sky at Stars at 5. Then on Sunday, we'll be back here at 10 o'clock on Sunday night. Liberty at Dream, Sun at Sparks, Shock at Lynx, and the Mercury at the Storm at 6 o'clock. And, of course, a travel day on Monday. And by the way, folks, a quick program alert. Tuesday night's game, Sparks at Washington at 5 o'clock. It can be seen on ESPN2 next Tuesday. So, again, it will not be shown on local TV, but it will be shown, though, with Ryan Rucco and Rebecca Lobo again at 5 o'clock tip on ESPN2. The first of 3 games you can see on ESPN2. Now, Chris, obviously, man, we are having some post-game, a little post-game depression again. We were. Again, I was aiming to go to the game on Father's Day on Sunday, but my dad was busy on the 21st, and we were going to have a big family barbecue, so we went to the home opener instead. But, folks, I can confirm for you now, as you had probably heard me rumbling about this a couple of, I want to say about maybe on Sunday when we were having our recap of the home opener, that I was kind of talking about a possible adaptation to one of our games that we had going on this season in July. I can confirm for you folks, after talking to my friend I'm taking up to LA, we're gonna be making it, folks, a 3-day vacation to LA. So folks, we already know about the 22nd, but now folks, we can confirm we'll have a back-to-back 2 in a row. 2 of them coming up to LAS 265 meet and greet nights, folks, on both July 21st and July 22nd. Coming up next month when the Sparks take on both the Phoenix Mercury and the New York Liberty. Now, again, folks, the reason why we're doing that as well is because I'm going to be on, as you can see me on television, on Wednesday at 12 o'clock on Sports Nation from the ESPN studios in downtown LA before I go and see the Liberty take on the Sparks. So, again, folks, we had already confirmed the first one, again, but now the July 21st game, Sparks and Mercury, which probably, folks, is on television, can be seen at 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock tip-off that night on ESPN2. So again, that's one part as well. So obviously, Chris, I know that you had a possible plan to go to the game on Sunday, but of course, man, something came up though about that. But Chris, now, man, now it's getting ratcheted up, Chris. Now we're having 2 of these in a row, man. What do you think about this? My goodness, 2 in a row. We're going a bit too far. What do you think?
That just can't wait until probably that work. Then we go to another Sparks game this season.
So again, folks, so the game plan here for this one is I'm going to be going up on Monday to Los Angeles, getting a hotel somewhere in the vicinity, staying Monday night, going to the game on Tuesday, staying Tuesday night, and then of course going to the game on Wednesday, coming home back here on Wednesday. So again, folks, to confirm for that again, back-to-back nights, if you can believe, folks, boy oh boy, back-to-back nights, again, folks. LAS 365 meet and greet nights 2 and 3, July 21st and July 22nd versus both the Phoenix Mercury and the New York Liberty. Now, of course, Chris, not much else to get to, man. We basically, I think, covered everything. Not a whole lot happened, of course. Does not help, man. There's been back-to-back off days here, of course. So with that, Chris, we'll go back to you, man. I know that, we'd watched the game on Tuesday, and of course, I was here to recap it on Tuesday. Chris, your overall thoughts about Tuesday's game, of course. Chris, we know, man, the Sparks again coming out great in the first half, but again, man, something just, clicks off again in the second half, man. What did you see go wrong for the Sparks in the second half of that game against the Lynx on Tuesday that led them to a 0-3 start? What do you think?
Just, like I said, just didn't have a big piece, puzzle piece, like either Tolliver, Wnba, or Parker to carry the team to finish the job, and just didn't have it. Just didn't have a talent out there.
Now, again, folks, the latest news I received from both Shorty Mamba 24 and on the broadcast on Tuesday is the injuries to Wnba and Beard are far more serious than we may have thought, which means that they could be out for a significant amount of time, more so than just a few games. Elena Beard has a foot issue, and of course, Nneka is still battling that very high ankle sprain suffered in that game against the Sun preseason back in May. So, Chris, obviously, man, if Beard and Wnba are out for longer than just a couple games, man, then the fire alarm starts ringing, then LA is really going to be in trouble, Chris. And, of course, man, we know the Sparks had cut Sierra Burdick. By the way, folks, she signed a contract with Atlanta. Yesterday, she'll be playing in her first game tomorrow with the Dream. So, of course, Chris, a player that probably could have taken a spot for someone, either her and, of course, Crystal Bradford is also injured, man. So, obviously, some draft day moves may have hurt Los Angeles. Chris, for all that I know, probably not. But, Chris, in your mind, man, if the Wnba and Beard are out for longer than a few games, man, how much worse, I guess, does it get for the Sparks in your mind if they do not have those two players coming back anytime soon, if the injuries are far more worse than we probably imagined?
I think if they're out for a significant time, and I think the Sparks are probably going to make a move somewhere about probably signing a player or something.
Chris, in your mind, though, I mean, can you really blame Brian Agler for this? I mean, because I know a lot of people, Chris, are already frustrated with Brian Agler and his lineup decisions, Chris. Chris, I went back and watched Backstage Sparks today on my DVR in my house, Chris, and Brian basically went up to Faria Abdi and said, you know, if you want to increase role, you got to work in practice. And Chris, Brian was really in her head, yelling at her. In regards to coaching, though, Chris, you know, it wasn't, you know, like it was, you know, out of frustration. But Chris, you know, that's why I think that the Sparks kept Abdi was to give her one last chance. But Chris, can you really blame Brian Agler for the start? That, you know, I mean, Chris, because Chris, I know very well, man, because, you know, I've been around sports for long enough, Chris. You know, you can't blame the coach for injuries. You know, you cannot do that. I mean, because, you know, they happen. You know, it's gonna, you know, it's happened. It happens to every team, Chris. But Chris, in your mind, can you really blame Brian Agler for the 0-3 start in your mind, or what do you think?
Nah, can't blame Brian Agler for the 0-3 start because the new team come from Seattle, a new team and big puzzle piece. Like I said earlier, it doesn't have big pieces to work with.
Chris, I know this came up in our Facebook group a few weeks ago, man, where someone had posted a video of Candace Parker having some fun with Sheldon a few weeks ago, running at a local LA mall, and a lot of fans, Chris, were irate about seeing her. You know, she's supposed to be resting apparently, but Chris, you know, does any blame fall on Candace Parker at all for not being here for Los Angeles for the first half of the season in your mind, or what do you think?
What?
Does any of the blame, do you think, perhaps with the start, land on Candace Parker's shoulders for missing the time to rest, but at the same time, though, that she's gone out and she's, you know, either been caught on video running with her husband or going to the beach with her family, Chris, or, you know, can you kind of blame her, I guess, in a way for, you know, not being in for the Sparks' bad start?
Probably not. Can't blame her because she's been playing overseas and she just wanted to get some time and rest.
Chris, you know I've said this, Chris, plenty of times, and Chris, I don't say this to defend Candace because she's a good friend of mine and my favorite player, Chris. But unless you've actually played a sport, now, Chris, I know that Cleo Mason, who was who played basketball in her career at USC, Chris, would know what I'm talking about here, Chris, in regards to playing a sport full season and then taking a week off and going and playing overseas. Chris, I did that for 3 years, so I know exactly what Parker is going through. And Chris, you know, do the fans expect Candace to sit at home and not do anything? I mean, is she not allowed to go out with her family and, you know, either, you know, and, you know, grab ass and play around with her husband for a bit? Or Chris, you know, I guess, Chris, you know, do the fans expect her to just go home and, you know, be like me all day and sit around in my house and watch television all day? I mean, is it against sports law to not go out and have fun with your family and friends while you are taking time off to rest your body from playing a full season overseas? Or, you know, what, Chris, you know, what do you really make of this whole situation going forward with Candace Parker being out till at least the All-Star break?
Agreed. Just go home and just sit and watch TV.
Yeah, I mean, you can probably, I mean, you know, if you want to blame her, you can blame her, folks. But, you know, unless you've actually gone through the athlete struggle of playing here and overseas like I have for 3 straight, when I did for 3 years, or what she's done, you know, you're not going to, you know, tell us to sit at home and do nothing. You know, we're going to go out to the beach and we're going to go and hang out with our friends and, you know, post videos of us running around with our husbands or best friends, whether you guys like it or not. Chris, I guess, though, that the last point I can bring up here, and I know I know, Chris, that this has been a talking point about this person for quite some time by the entire LA fan base, Chris. Is Penny Toller the person to blame for the 0-3 start and also for the past struggles of the Sparks, either on draft day or other things included, Chris? Is Penny Toller the likely suspect for this 0-3 start, Chris, for how she's built this team for 2015 in your mind?
Pretty much because cutting players like this need.
Chris, I think that Penny Toller, man, is probably the one that I'd say 9 people out of 10 that are LA fans, Chris, would probably point the finger at saying that's who we blame, Chris. And I think, though, that's also, out of frustration, though, in regards to how the previous few seasons have gone, in regards to early exits in the playoffs, the roster moves, Chris, even some of the draft day moves, Chris. I think, though, Chris, that the tip of the iceberg, as we already folks to sign out here for the night, Chris, I think, though, that the move that a lot of people really got turned off of was when the Sparks cut Sierra Burdick. Not because I'm a huge fan of hers for the Aviator shades, but, Chris, that she was a huge upgrade over Faria Abdi, Chris. And we know, Chris, that the Sparks got rid of Nikki Green, who was a player of the Sparks that fans wanted gone long ago, but she was kept on until the last day of cuts, Chris. So I guess, Chris, to re-ask question, man, is Penny Toller, in regards to either draft day, previous moves, Chris, is she the person to blame, though, for this bad start for LA in your mind?
I think, yeah, she struggles by the LA Sparks, like Cunning, Burdick, and just cunning players that we couldn't.
That's why.
So, folks, we'll let you chew on that question as we get started for the night, folks. Getting our tour question tonight is, if you are playing the blame game 3 games of the season, who are you blaming and why? Is it head coach Brian Agler? Is it Candace Parker? Or is it Penny Toller? Let us know on Twitter, and we will get your responses next time on the show. But with that, folks, we thank you for stopping by and joining us here for the last 32 minutes. Until tomorrow night, folks, have a safe night. Drive home safely. Thank you all for coming, and good night now. This has been the LA Sparks 365 Network. We are Sparks. We are LA. We have a WNBA. We'll see folks back here to recap some action tomorrow night at 10:30 back here on LAS 365. For Chris Mancy up in Anaheim, Cameron signing off. Good night. See you folks back here either tomorrow or sometime over the weekend. Bye-bye.